Hi, everybody. This is Ted Hughes, the curator at the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula. And this is Steve Bixby, who co-curated and redecorated the North Gallery. And he's also our board president, right? That's true. What a great dignitary we have here today. And he's going to help us walk through the North Gallery in the fire call exhibit, because last time we showed it to you, we were in the middle of putting everything together. So it's all squared away now. So we'll start at the bottom of the stairs.
So kind of some interesting things here that sort of explain a little bit about the history here. Early days of the Forest Service, 1905, forest fires were, the official policy anyway, was that they were all evil. And there was nothing good about them. A lot of people did think that they were natural and really did have some value, but that wasn't the official policy. And so what they had to do then was get them out as quickly as possible. And so in order to do that, you needed a good system of communications. And so that's really what this whole exhibit is showing, is the different methods they used. And so as we head on up, you can see some of the old photos.
Does anyone see this movie, Red Skies of Montana, that was filmed here in Missoula?
That's pretty hokey.
You can find clips. Yeah, it was hokey. So we like to decorate the stairwell, so you have something to look at on your way up.
And this is kind of an interesting one Ted was just showing you. That's actually Slide Rock Lookout. So the one that's here on the museum grounds, and Smokey used it to help promote the cause.
And if you look at the hairstyles, that'll give you an idea of the vintage of that poster.
And the grizzly and grizz colors there too. So.
Yeah. Here's some old-timey photos.
Strange.
Oh, here's a mountain man photo that we have. That's Steve in when he was working at a firelight lookout. When was that?
80-ish.
80-ish. Yeah. There's another nice vintage.
I love the little photo here of the Forest Protection Week. The irony of that is that the two buildings in the background, that's the Hammond Arcade that burned to the ground. That's the Second Florence Hotel, which burned to the ground.
Yeah.
So kind of.
They needed a downtown protection. There's our friend Ringbell Adams. We're going to see that phone in a little bit that he developed.
Interesting, a lot of people don't, or you won't find Missoula National Forest on the maps these days. A lot of people didn't know there was such a thing for some time. Same with Blackfeet National Forest, that's not around anymore. Kind of a neat sign at the end here. This one was built by the 9 Mile CCC boys. So that one came out of a barn up there.
And these are all lent to us by our friends at the National Museum of Forest Service History.
And I mentioned that they were getting the word out very quickly was so important. And so at one time, Montana had over 600 lookouts, mostly, as you can see, western Montana, but believe it or not, there's one that's something like 25 miles southeast of Ekalaka. So you're getting out there in the middle of nowhere. But these are the ones that are still standing today, about 60 of them, about 40 that are still being manned. Like I said, over 600, because it's so important to get that word out as quickly as possible. And so the Forest Service really tried some different methods and techniques to do that and communicate. And so this wall over here is kind of the, what would we call it, a tribute to the things that didn't work. They didn't work all that well. The carrier pigeons would be one of them. Were used. Typically what you hear is they were better for dinner than messaging though, so not really successful. Some other things, a lot of it adapted from the military, the semaphores, the heliograph.
Dynamite.
Big experiment using shotgun blasts or dynamite, kind of a code for that. Radios were tried even in 1910 around then, but they just weren't up to the job yet. Just very hard to use. A lot of times they'd still have to transmit using the old telegraph. And so that took a lot of training. You're talking about a lot of summer hires, so they haven't had the chance to really get trained up in how to do Morse code. Same with the heliograph over there. Again, needed sunlight, needed a lot of training, needed a knowledge of the Morse code. So.
And you needed sunlight.
Only, yep. And then, of course, as the sun moved, it had to constantly be readjusted, so it'd work for a couple minutes, and then you'd be out of adjustment and have to start over. On this little service buzzer here, kind of has a neat story. Again, this is on loan from the National Museum of Forest Service History right here in Missoula. This is one that Dave Stack, the curator, had shown me, and it basically is just a little portable telegraph unit. He said he's not really aware of the Forest Service using them all that much, other than the fact that this one has scratched into the case the forester's name, says Forest Service, and a date of 1914, I think it was, 1914. But it was kind of interesting as Ted and I were doing some of the research and trying to get some more information. We ran across a Missoulian article from 1910 that talked about the Forest Service coming out and doing a demonstration of the little service buzzer. And so very clearly they were promoting it and trying to get it to work, but just never really did as well as it should have.
No.
And so eventually the telephone became the thing that was most widely used. And this one kind of, we're jumping ahead quite a ways time-wise here, but this guy is such a special and neat little thing that we sort of wanted to give it its own special wall here. This one came out of the Lolo Ranger Station, and so you can see a lot of the names on there are Lolo-related ones. Kind of cool because the photo up here is of this very phone being hooked up to the, or is it the Powell Ranger Station, which you can find on there. Oh, yep, right there. So the Powell Ranger Station. And there's the guys when they were stringing the wire in 1912 between the Lola Ranger Station and the Powell one. And it's also kind of fun on this map over here of trying to find these different things. So the Lola Station is right up here, and then Powell is way down here in the corner. But many of the other names you can see on there, like the Bacon Ranch, Grovedale, Wendover, Lolo Springs, Lookout, Lolo Hot Springs, all of those were places that phone was connected up to with the different wires.
And that phone is from our collection. So the exhibit, we want you to go this way. We even put arrows on the floor for you so you know which way to go.
And so over here is kind of a display of some of the really early ground wire lines. And these were ones that would just use one wire up in the trees, and we'll show you more about that in a second. And then the second would be grounded, so it would be something hooked to a rod, sometimes even just a bayonet. And a second wire would be hooked to that and stuck into the ground, and that would make the circuit. So the one over here Ted's showing you now is kind of a standard model that would have been used around 1900. Forest Service did use those, but they didn't work quite as well, so they started adapting things to their liking more. And
Railroad used it.
So Railroad would use it a lot. And so the two boxes in the middle here, you can see one closed up and one open. Those were the ones that they started using. Had a magneto in there so you could turn the crank and make the bell ring and be heard down in the ranger station, hopefully. Most of these, if they're portable, they would actually just throw a wire over the existing telephone line, and then, like I say, ground the other end of your wire and connect up that way. And so this is kind of a couple of the examples up close here. This is the one that we'll talk a little bit more about here in just a second, but that was just a nice little portable unit there. You can see the two connections here where one would go over the existing telephone line, the other grounded. This was a little bit more modern, a little bit heavier too, but again, an official Forest Service issue, and would have a strap here that you could carry it around. Both of these did not have magnetos, so no crank generator, just batteries in there, D-cell batteries. And so for those to work, the ranger station had to have some sort of an alarm type thing, and that's what's up here at the top. That's called a howler, and that would make a howling noise, big squawk, to let you know there's a call coming in. That's the typical ringer below it that, like I say, this type of phone would not ring. or wouldn't work with. But that was how you would connect up to the ranger station, was that way. If you're trying to call, let's say, another lookout on one of these portable phones, you'd have to call down to the ranger station where they had the howler. The howler would buzz, they'd then connect you up to the ranger, or connect the wires up, and you could talk to the other lookout.
That was developed by this guy, right?
And this is a Missoulian, R.B. Adams, or Ring Bell Adams, but he was hired off from one of the local telephone companies here in Missoula.
Rocky Mountain Bell.
And really became the catalyst for getting these little phones done. He's the one who developed this. Got a couple pictures of him actually talking away on it.
Here's an article from a magazine, 1927, about Ring Bell. He really tried to push the radio too, but didn't get. The Forest Service wasn't interested back then.
And so there really are amazing variations on the telephones. This one here, the aluminum box, is an official Forest Service one. You can see it on the door there, how it is official here. That one would have been out in the woods somewhere. You'd be hiking along, or the smoke chasers would know where it's at, and they'd come on down and be able to call out on that. As soon as military things started coming along, they started adapting as many of those as they could. So the other one there in the leather case is a kind of a newer model, but again, just another variation on the portable.
That's Ring Bell Adams' scrapbook. We have a whole collection of items related to R.B. Adams that was donated to us in 1996. That's him down in Ravalli trying to get a radio station going. Way back in the 20s.
And so another variation over here is a different kind of phone. This is a mine phone, and again, just the type that would have been stuck out in the trees. In fact, in the Bob Marshall, you can still find one of those out here alongside one of the trails there. Oops, that's actually functional. Unfortunately, they're very tough.
They're heavy. It's like 100 pounds, probably 90.
So the very first lookouts were nothing more than just a map table. They called them rag camps occasionally, because all they'd have would be a big tent, and the person would live down below in the tent and then come on up to the peak, and this would be up there, just a little map table and a little alidade that they could use to figure out exactly the direction of the fire from the lookout. And then again, oftentimes a phone would be mounted nearby, and as long as there wasn't lightning in the area, they were instructed to call out and get that fire reported as quickly as they could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, behind Ted here, you can see kind of how this line would work. So as I mentioned, it was just a single wire, very thick wire, nothing at all like what you think about with a normal telephone line. But the idea was there'd be enough slack in there, and these insulators that were rounded and could let the wire just slide right on through. So if something fell on this line, it's not going to break this wire. That is too tough. It's just going to drag it right down to the ground. And hopefully there's enough slack between all these various trees that it's just going to pull it right down. Now we show it just short distance here, but really it'd be about 150 feet, something like that. I think 130 to 150 between the trees. And there's quite a science to it. So here what Ted's showing you is the guys using these climbing spurs and the climbing belts. Examples down here on the wall, and climbing on up that tree and putting the insulators in. There's so many different things we could be looking at here, and so one of them is this evolution of how the insulators worked. Initially they did just try the regular telephone ones. They tended to crack in the wintertime. If something did fall on them, they just break the insulators. They went to a single piece white insulator like this one. Again, bless you, the wire could just slip right on through that. The problem was, if this broke, they had to either splice the wire, which was a big pain and would give a bad connection, or run another one on up the line, and that was a real pain. So they went to a split insulator like this guy here, these two. And so they are two-piece, and you could easily replace them if something broke. The problem these had, twofold, the wire would sometimes get caught in here, wouldn't be able to slide anymore, and it'd break everything. Or a hunter would come along and want to do a little target practicing, sight in his rifle, and he'd see this nice white thing up there in the tree and shoot it out. And so he switched over to the dark brown one, so it would just blend in a little bit better and hopefully not be so noticeable.
Yep. A little less work in the spring when they were repairing everything. So
eventually, like I said, the lookouts kind of evolved from the little temporary ones, the secondary lookouts, and eventually they came up with the 410 by 14 foot tower, either on the ground or up high in the air. This was called an L4 lookout, and this was designed by another guy right here in Missoula, Carl. I've heard it Fickes, there's various ways you can say it, but he's the one that came up with this very classical lookout design.
He was out here at the turn of the century, one of the early rangers.
And a huge part of the 9 Mile, he's the one who really was responsible for making the remount station out there.
Yeah, there's the remount.
And there he is.
There it is.
And there's little mules.
There he is. He loved dancing in his old age.
So this over here is kind of showing again the idea of the lookout tower, and again how important the communication was. So every lookout would have its phone and be connected up to, as you saw, the ranger station down there, and could quickly call in. Earlier days, some of them didn't, and they'd have the heliograph and have to use that, and then connect up to another that had a telephone and could call on in. So this is kind of giving you an idea of what that would have been like in our old, this is actually Bosworth firefinder, but the Osborne firefinders are the really typical ones. This guy was used to look out here in Missoula County, up north of town, up by Reno.
And Steve built this stand, by the way.
Semi-official Forest Service.
It's really cool looking.
Blueprints, but semi-official.
And here's some more of Steve's remodeling here with wood from our sawmill here on the ground.
And this would have been typical of the ranger station would have had its, again, the various lines for the telephone hooked up to all the different places. In the area would have had on the wall the howler again, so if somebody's got the portables, they could still call in. And then again, sometimes another ringer separate, because that might be a completely separate line. So that might be the one connecting to town. So the lookouts could call into the ranger station and they could patch into that other line and send a message on out to civilization.
There's the ranger's jackalope.
And Ted's the one who picked out the photo of the ranger's
That's the ranger's wife.
Girlfriend, I don't know what, but
in the 30s. These window frames, the Region 1 Preservation group makes frames, or window frames, to restore old fire lookouts, and they use the exact same measurements from the original window frame, so they lent us this frame.
And they get exact
and the frames on our lookout.
The design on these. This is not just some modern way that those are cut. That is the exact way that they would have been back in the 1930s. And they're able to replicate that perfectly and make these beautiful windows. So again, that's the Historic Preservation Office of the Forest Service here in town.
There's Merle Mckenna. He was a lookout up the 9 Mile. He was a cartoonist, so his daily log and diary is full of cartoons. And I found a funny one of Hitler, but this is 1937. This is even before the invasion of Poland. But Merle knew that he was an idiot by 1937.
That's amazing. And one of the very early lookouts would have been just in a tree. And so there's sort of an evolution of lookouts here, but this is again from the National Museum of Forest Service history on loan from them. But definitely kind of a neat old sign for the lookout tree. And then down below is another, the typical sign that would be found in the towers. Although we're not promoting graffiti here and defacing public property, it's kind of almost a work of art now with all that on there.
Yeah. Someone was up there on their three-wheeler in 1986. They don't have those anymore because they were a killer.
And part of the idea of this originally was going to be a very hands-on exhibit where people could come and actually see how things work and touch many of the displays in here. And unfortunately, with all the COVID-19 issues, it's a very much a hands-off exhibit right now. But this was one of the ideas we wanted to show was why the telephones were selected. They really are very simple, very straightforward, and very not very breakable, very durable sort of things. And so to be hauling this around on the back of a mule and putting it up in a lookout tower and leaving it, it's not like a radio. It's not going to have all the adjustments and things of that sort. So this invisible phone here basically is trying to get across the idea there's not all that much in there. When you open up one of these other ones, it looks really complicated inside and wires going everywhere. But really, they're all basically just these 7 or 8 different components. And so very easy for people to use, and everybody was familiar with it. So we don't have to learn that Morse code and go through all that. So then we kind of move on from the telephones into the era of the radios. And for that, again, it made so much more sense to use radio, but it just wasn't ready to be done in the early days. And so one of the early radios is this box down here. This was called an SPF radio and would just be shut, locked on up. Could be hauled around on the mule. The batteries are inside there. It's got the microphone. It's got the microphone here and speaker there. So kind of a nice little self-contained unit right there. They had various ones of those, another down here that was slightly different style, but same idea, everything inside there. Might have a pair of headphones for some of these as well. And then some got a little bit more durable into the metal boxes, metal cases. But again, something that's kind of interesting here is to show that transition from a radio with the headset and microphone into something that was more like a telephone. And so oftentimes they're called radio telephones, just to kind of get across that idea.
Like the ones next to it that are for under the dash.
Exactly. So this one is an official lookout radio here. This is an FM, one of the radios that would have been used in the 1970s in a lookout tower. And a lot of these were sort of getting, I guess, putting lookouts right out of business because they'd have a repeater in there. So you could flip a switch and somebody could call up to the lookout, and instead of having to talk to the lookout and have them relay the message, it could be done automatically. A couple others over here. We're starting to get to the smaller portable radios, still not exactly small, but again, the battery powered, so much
They called
nicer.
them radio phones.
And again, radio phones.
That transition.
The military was really doing a lot of work with radios, and so the Forest Service was kind of jumping on board. But a lot of these things are from the actual Forest Service radio laboratory out in Portland, Oregon, radio specialty. And so they were kind of pioneering here in the early days. The one in the middle here is an aircraft one, so that's just a receiver that would have been on board an aircraft. And then you can see as we get up to the top how they kind of continued getting smaller and smaller and more portable.
Walkie-talkies. Talkie-walkies and walkie-talkies.
And those are the ones that evolved from, as you can see over here, the big Packmaster type radios, and then kept getting smaller and smaller, and eventually went to what they're using still to some degree today. Missoula had its own radio station here for the Forest Service, and that's the sign that came from that, on loan from the Forest Service Museum again. But if you've been up Whitaker, you've seen that little building, and that used to be hanging outside the building. Now, one other area we kind of headed to, just because who doesn't like Smokey Bear, was Smokey. And so I am saying Smokey Bear, even though the sign up there says Smokey the Bear. It was Smokey Bear when the song was written. They needed the correct tempo, and so the songwriter added the in there, and it became Smokey the Bear. But officially, you still just say Smokey Bear. And he became very famous. Kind of an interesting connection a lot of folks don't know about is Bambi. So you see the bookmark in there with Bambi on it. Bambi had that great scene in there of the forest fire destroying everything and scaring the heck out of poor Bambi and all the animals.
And all the kids watching the movie.
The kids watching the movie, very influential. So the Forest Service at that time, 1941, I believe it was, worried about fires starting because they didn't have really anybody around to put them out. And so they went to Disney and asked if they could borrow Bambi and use Bambi to promote preventing forest fires. Disney allowed it, but just for a year. And so the Forest Service very quickly got going on some other spokesman for preventing fires, and Smokey is the one that came out. And so there's the early Smokey that they started using, and Smokey just became incredibly popular and one of the most recognized cartoon characters even to today.
Yeah, that's a legendary marketing campaign.
Absolutely.
Smokey. Here's a clip from 1952 where he's singing the Smokey the Bear song. That guy is doing a great drawing really fast.
Talented. So one of the things we didn't show over here was a lot of folks don't realize how far back forestry goes in Missoula, but having the School of Forestry here, UM, and getting that really on board very early on, really brought a lot of things in. So it was actually a lookout on the top of Mount Sentinel. The students, forestry students, were able to go up there and get actual training in a lookout. It was the only forestry school that offered that. Burned down mysteriously, but many, many years ago. But still, I think it brought in a lot of other things. And so something around the corner we're showing is some of the other things that Missoula still has. The smoke jumpers coming to town, the Equipment Development Center did a lot of work. You probably have heard of, maybe been out to the Fire Sciences Lab. And then, as we mentioned, the School of Forestry bringing things in. So a lot of...
1908, it was one of the first ranger schools for the Forest Service.
And so only 3 years after the Forest Service even came into existence, and then they started having the schools. So kind of a...
Before that, you had all these snooty East Coast blue bloods that went to the Yale School of Forestry.
And they were not well accepted out here in Montana, so it was really nice to be able to have local boys who knew Montana and the backwoods and really knew about mules and things like that. And you had to have that if you're going to be a ranger. So it was not just the big city kids that got the ranger jobs. It was locals.
They were generalists and multitaskers.
They were. And we hit on a few other things that women in the Forest Service have been very much a part of it for many, many years. A lot of it is they're very, what do you want to say, they don't get the recognition because a lot of times they'd be the ranger's wife and they were expected to run the telephones and be the one doing the communications. And yet they never got paid for it. They didn't get any credit for it, and yet it was sort of an expectation.
And they would try to hire fire lookouts that were married so that they would bring their wife along to do all this free labor.
Exactly, and have a free fill-in when, if the guy wasn't around. But
So you can learn all about that.
So, yeah.
Anything else we want to share before
I guess the one last one, on another thing on loan from the Forest Service Museum. This came out of the middle of the woods, basically, and this would have been one of the, a phone booth, basically. So there would have been a telephone inside here. So if it wasn't one of the mine phones or the old aluminum box type, they had to protect a little bit more. So something like this might have been right alongside a lookout tower, or the open tower, I should say, the secondary type.
There's
And
graffiti from 1915 on there.
and amazing, this one, the other sides you can't really see, but they're again covered with graffiti, again back from the teens and 20s. We didn't really talk about the code of using these, but a lot of people, I'm sure you might remember the how you would dial with a short ring and a long ring, and so you can read on this one, this call is too long and too short. So 2 long rings followed by 2 short rings, and that would be the signal to pick up the phone here. And back to that one we showed you before, every station had its own little individual ring on that party line, so you know when somebody's calling you. And I think that kind of took us right back to where we started.
Yeah, and then we did the circle. So it's a small space, but we got a lot of history crammed in here. So come down and check out our exhibit, Fire Call. We're open every single day, Monday through Saturday, 10 to 4, and Sunday, 12 to 4. And bring a mask. Thank you for watching, and everyone take care out there, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks much. Thank you.